You've probably seen the movies, right? The heroic pioneers and their covered wagons boldly heading west. Well, I'm here to tell you the reality of the Oregon Trail was a whole lot darker. So let's pull back the curtain on one of the most grueling migrations in American history.
I mean, that quote says it all, doesn't it? For the 500,000 souls who made this trek, it wasn't about being a hero. It was just about surviving. To really get what that felt like, we're going to follow this story of a young boy who lived it, a kid named Thomas Benton.
So our story kicks off right here, Independence, Missouri. This was the starting line for so many families, including Thomas's. They're literally about to walk away from everything they know, all for a promise that, honestly, sounded almost too good to be true.
And here it is. This is the promise that got people to move. The Donation Land Act. For a married couple, they were offering 640 acres of free land. I mean, think about that. That's a massive amount of land, more than most people could even dream of owning. It was the American dream just waiting for them, at the end of a 2,000-mile road.
Okay, so how do you even pack for something like this? A 6-month trip into total wilderness. Well, you sell pretty much everything you own, and you cram what's left of your life into a tiny farm wagon, what they called a prairie schooner. Your entire future boiled down to flour, tools, seeds, and maybe one or two things you just couldn't bear to part with. Everything else, gone.
That early excitement, that sense of adventure, yeah, that didn't last long. Within just a few days on the trail, the dream of a new life got replaced by a reality that was just grinding and, honestly, pretty terrifying.
Get this, 2 miles per hour. That was the pace. And you weren't riding comfortably in the wagon. No, you were walking next to the oxen, breathing in dust, day after day after day.
On a really good day, you might make 15 miles. 15! It was this agonizingly slow crawl across an entire continent. A crawl that just went on for months.
So you do the math. You're looking at about 170 days. That's almost 6 months of just pure hardship. And there was absolutely no turning back. This wasn't a road trip. This was an epic test of what a human being could endure.
And this was life. It became this simple, brutal loop. You'd wake up before the sun, walk all day in the heat and the dust, set up camp, try to sleep, and then do the exact same thing the next day. It wasn't just physically exhausting. The sheer monotony could break you.
Now, this is so important because the real dangers weren't what you see in the movies. All the dramatic shootouts. Fights with Native Americans were actually pretty rare. The real killers were way more common and way deadlier. Things like cholera from a dirty water source, a dangerous river crossing, or a simple, tragic accident like someone falling under a wagon wheel.
And then, for every single family, there came a moment. A point where you looked at your dwindling supplies, you looked at the map, and you just knew there's no going back. We're in this now. It was Oregon or nothing. And it's in these moments of crisis that you really saw what people were made of.
The real enemy out here wasn't a person. It was the calendar. Everyone knew the rule. You had to get to a landmark called Independence Rock by the 4th of July. If you did, you'd probably make it over the mountains before the snow came. Well, as you can see, Thomas's group, they're 2 months late. That's not just behind schedule, that's terrifying. Everyone knew the stories of what happened to the Donner Party.
But this kind of crisis, it can also bring people together. I mean, when one family's wagon flipped over in a river, it was young Thomas who jumped into that freezing water to save their little girl. You shared what you had, because you knew tomorrow you might be the one who needs help.
So after all that, the wagon train finally makes it to the Blue Mountains in Oregon. This is it, the last major obstacle. But it's late, way too late in the year, and winter isn't some distant threat anymore. It's right on top of them.
Can you imagine the feeling in your stomach the first snowflakes start to fall in September? It's way too early. This isn't just bad weather. This is a death sentence if they don't move. The race for survival has officially begun.
As they push on, it just gets worse. Food is almost gone, so the wagon master has to start cutting rations for everyone. People are already weak, and now a sickness they call mountain fever, which was probably typhoid, starts spreading through the camp like wildfire.
And then, the moment they all feared, the snow gets too deep. They can't go on. So they have to make an absolutely gut-wrenching decision. A small, stronger group will push ahead on foot to try and find help. Everyone else, including Thomas's own sister Sarah, who's really sick, has to stay behind and wait.
And that wait, it was a complete nightmare.
Food was basically gone, just a thin, watery gruel. They could hear wolves circling their camp every night. The cold was just relentless. It was a fight for your life every single hour. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a rescue party finally made it through the snow.
Okay, so they survived the winter. They've been rescued, but the journey still isn't over. This wasn't some triumphant victory march into Oregon. It was one last, brutal slog before they could finally rest.
You heard me right. The trail ended at the Columbia River. So what did they have to do? They had to take their wagons apart piece by piece, last them to logs to build these makeshift rafts, and then float down one of the most dangerous rivers in the country. It was one last insane life-or-death test.
And this is what it was all for. This little piece of legislation, the Donation Land Act, the official, legal promise that pulled them all the way across a continent, this was the foundation for the new lives they almost died trying to build.
So when you boil it all down, this is what you get. The promise versus the price. The dream was this huge piece of land and a fresh start. The reality was disease, starvation, and leaving pieces of your heart buried along the trail. They got their new life in Oregon, no doubt, but it was a life built on a foundation of scars.
And that really leaves us with just one question, doesn't it? Imagine you're Thomas, finally standing on your family's 640 acres. You're looking out at this beautiful new home, but you're also looking back at the mountains you crossed and thinking about the people who didn't make it. Was it worth it? It's a huge question, and it tells you everything you need to know about the incredible, sometimes brutal price of a dream.